Hello and welcome to China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, what a rapidly ageing population looks like at scale and how China's secondary languages keep their traditions alive. And in a moment, we'll hear from one of China's retired senior colonels speaking from Beijing. In a wide-ranging interview, we talk about the controversial pact with Solomon Islands, a new Cold War, and he restates China's determination to reunify Taiwan.
If they declare independence, they will have to use force.
But first tonight, the latest news out of China. Joining me is Michael Liu. Michael, in a rare televised address, President Xi Jinping has proposed a new global security initiative.
Hi Stan, President Xi made the remarks during a video speech to the annual Boao Asia Forum last week.
摒弃冷战思维，反对单边主义，不搞集团政治和阵营对抗，坚持重视各国合理安全关切，秉持安全不可分割原则，构建均衡有效、可持续的安全架构。 反对把本国安全建立在他国不安全的基础之上。
In his speech, Mr. Xi invoked the phrase indivisible security. That's a phrase endorsed by Vladimir Putin, that no country should strengthen its security at the cost of another. President Xi also said only talks, not sanctions, could resolve disputes in a veiled reference to moves against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine.
当今世界任何单边主义、极端利己主义 都是根本行不通的，任何脱钩、断供、极限施压的行径都是根本行不通的，任何搞小圈子、以意识形态划线、挑动对立对抗，也都是根本行不通的。
And Michael, that language gives an interesting context to discussions this week between China and America's top defence officials.
Certainly, Stan, it is the first time US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has spoken to his Chinese counterpart, Wei Fenghe, who took the opportunity once again to reiterate that Taiwan is Chinese territory. He said that if the Taiwan question is not handled properly, it will have a subversive effect on China-US relations, adding the Chinese military will resolutely safeguard national sovereignty, security and territorial integrity.
And in what has been an incredibly busy week in foreign affairs, Michael, top US official Kurt Campbell went to Solomon Islands on Friday to deal with that international spot fire.
That's right. The visit came just days after Solomon Islands signed a new security deal with China. In a statement after the meeting, the White House said Secretary Campbell outlined clear areas of concern and that if steps are taken to establish a de facto permanent military presence, the United States would then have significant concerns and respond accordingly. Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare has repeatedly said he has no intention of allowing China to set up a military base in Solomon Islands. But there's no doubt the two governments are building a close friendship.
One that has consolidated in such a short period of time with trust, respect, and a genuine desire to achieve long-term sustainable development outcomes.
And the Australian government has been under pressure to explain how that security pact came about despite its clear objections.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison said any military base would be a red line, but did not say what Australia would do if that line was crossed.
I share the same red line that the United States has when it comes to these issues, and we're very aware of that and actions that could be needed, working together with our partners to ensure regional security, not just for Australia, but for the whole region, working together to ensure that we don't have any negative influences here in our part of the world.
Zhou Bo was a senior colonel in the People's Liberation Army from 2003 until 2020 and was director of the Centre for International Security Cooperation at the Ministry of National Defence. He is now a senior fellow at the Centre for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University, and he joins me from Beijing. It's good to have you with us. Senior Colonel Zhou, can we talk about what China's intentions are in the Solomon Islands? Is the intention to establish a military base?
Well, first of all, it's a request from Solomon government for us to provide a kind of assistance for maintaining security. So the request, first of all, comes from the Solomon government. I don't believe that it is true that China would wish to establish a military base there. The question is, China only has one logistics supply base in Djibouti to facilitate PLA's counter-piracy operation in the Gulf of Aden, in which we actually had a cooperation with Australian Navy as well. So there is no point for China to establish a military base.
And yet this has been speculated about for some time. You mentioned Djibouti. Of course, there is also the port in Pakistan. China has claimed and militarized the disputed islands of the South China Sea, and there has been a lot of speculation about establishing a military base in the Pacific. Why wouldn't it then lead people to assume that, yes, China does indeed want to establish a military presence in the Solomon Islands?
The answer is very simple, because China has no global military ambition, because China doesn't want to become a global policeman. That is why China so far has only provided humanitarian aid to foreign countries in terms of military operations, be it peacekeeping, be it counter-piracy, be it disaster relief. If you put all Chinese military operations together, you would find their only military.
But sir, we're not talking about a global aspiration. What we are talking about is a regional aspiration, and China has been very clear that it wants to establish itself as the preponderant power in the region. That's why China is increasing a military presence in the South China Sea. That's why we've seen increased military exercises over Taiwan, and that's why China is increasing its presence in the Pacific, is it not?
I think you put too many things together. Because China has no global military ambitions, therefore it doesn't need to establish a military base in South Pacific, where China, apart from economic benefits, doesn't have much security concern. And when you talk about South China Sea, you are actually referring to China's sovereign rights, in the South China Sea.
Disputed, and also, according to the International Maritime Court in The Hague, it was not to be claimed by any party, and China did that anyway.
Well, it is disputed, that is for sure, but China has its own claims based on history, based on its own interpretation of the international law. So we in China believe that the islands and adjacent water in the South China Sea are China's sovereign territory and territorial waters.
Senior Colonel Zhou, why, if indeed, as you say, China does not want to establish a military base or a military port in the Solomons, why the need for the security pact in the first place?
And actually, I would ask you a question. Why are Australians so worried about this? Because you are certainly closer to Solomon Islands than China. And if you are worried about China's security pact with Solomon Islands, you actually are in a better position to provide it to the Solomon Islands. And why don't you do that? And why would you oppose to China doing that? And China did this because Solomon Islands asked for it. And I believe as small nations, they probably would try, as all of them would do, a kind of a balance.
Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, has been very clear. He has said that this is a red line. And if China was to indeed pursue establishing such a base, that it would be considered a red line. I want your interpretation of what that means. How does China see that, a red line?
I don't believe the Australian government is in any capacity to lay any red line for China's cooperation with Solomon Islands. Let me reiterate again, as my government has said, that China has no intention whatsoever to establish a military base in Solomon Islands. Besides, we too are sovereign states, and we certainly are fully entitled to have whatever cooperation we want. So this has nothing to do with Australia.
Well, it does have something to do with Australia, because Australia is a Pacific nation, and Australia has a long relationship with Pacific nations and a long relationship with a country like the Solomon Islands. Clearly, the United States is going to increase its presence in the Solomons as well. And now the Prime Minister is saying this is a red line. Again, I want to ask you, how does China interpret that language?
Well, I believe you are not doing good enough. Otherwise, why would the Solomon Island government ask Chinese to help, since you are much closer? So won't you set your own soul to find out why the situation has actually happened? And so you should actually be in a better position to do that. And you should have done better. And why would you blame China? Because of request from Solomon government.
Again, you're not really answering the question about the red line and how China would perceive a red line. That is a message coming very clearly from Australia. about a line that cannot be crossed. So how does China respond to that?
I don't believe Australian government is in any capacity to lay such things like a red line for China. It is ridiculous. It is laughable for me.
See, language like that, Senior Colonel Zhou, it is laughable, questioning Australia's interests in the Pacific. When you couple that with increasing military presence in the South China Sea, increasing military exercises over Taiwan, threats to reunify or take Taiwan by force, which Xi Jinping continues to talk about, does that not send a signal of increasing Chinese aggression in the region?
No, I don't think so. Well, when you talk about a red line, that is extremely ridiculous in that, where is the red line? The red line is it, could you lay a red line in a sovereign state like Solomon Islands? It's not on any part of Australia. So how could you describe it as a red line in terms of cooperation between sovereign states? When you talk about Taiwan issue, 181 countries, including Australia, recognize it to be part of China. So what's the problem if we would use we would possibly use force as a last resort only?
What is the problem if you use force? Are you seriously saying there is no problem if you use force against Taiwan when Taiwan sees itself as a country pursuing its own interests? It carries out its own elections. It establishes relationships with the rest of the world from Taipei. To say that there is no problem if you use force that potentially could trigger a broader conflict involving the United States and Australia and lead to potentially catastrophic loss of life, and you say there is no problem with that?
If they declare independence, they will have to use force. If there are major events that are used by foreign forces that cause the separation of Taiwan, we might use force. And then if the mainland China concludes that all the conditions for peaceful reunifications are exhausted, we might use force. So these are the three conditions that are laid down clearly in the anti-secession law. It doesn't mean that we would use force freely or willingly.
Senior Colonel Zhou, do you believe that we are now in a new Cold War?
I think to a great extent, yes. Actually, I believe we have entered into a world with two Cold Wars. One is in Europe. After this hot war, definitely a Cold War scenario will re-emerge in Europe. And in the Asia Pacific, people do not talk about it openly, especially at the government level. But Donald Trump has actually ushered in this great power competition. And Joe Biden's policy is very much a follow-up. And Joe Biden's policy toward China is basically extreme competition short of war. If competition is already extreme, isn't it a Cold War? What else can it be?
And just finally on that, what about China's role in that? China's support for Russia, China's increasing militarization, and its increasing threats to Taiwan. If indeed we are in a new Cold War, how much is China contributing to that?
China can stand tall and firm because China is not a weight that would be added to the Russian side or to the American side, like during the Cold War. Because at that time, if you are weaker than the two sides that are stronger than you, your weight actually becomes important if it is added to one side. But China now is growing. China is becoming more important. Whatever has happened in the world, it could not change the fact that the world political economic ships are moving toward the Asia Pacific, with China standing right in the center.
Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, thank you again for giving us your time.
Thank you.
China is home to hundreds of different languages and dialects. However, the popularisation of Mandarin as the standard national language is coming at their expense. Our reporters Jinghua Chan and Annie Louey explain why China wants its citizens to use Mandarin and how some minority language speakers are pushing back.
Annie 啊，我都想加嘢啦，好差啲做咧。Hi, I'm Annie. Sorry, I forgot. Can we do that again? Hi, I'm Annie. My family is from Taishan. It's a few hours away from Guangzhou, and I speak Taishanese. 我好想要你緊心。 講山口涼啊？發生啥啦？你真係落雨嗎？有啲劇烈，真的今早事體太多了。
Hi, my name is Jinghua. I'm 1/4 Taishanese, but I never learned the language. So my first language is Shanghainese.
你到冇得講啊？
到啥地方去啊？
你可以用英文問我準備會好你嘅所有英文音。
啊？已經走啦？啥意思啊？ That's it. I'm out.
So would you go on another date with Jinghua?
Nah, I don't think I would. I came back to the table and they were gone. What's up with that?
You see, in China, it's common for people from different regions and ethnic groups to have trouble understanding each other.
Like me and Annie.
There are hundreds of different spoken languages in China today, with 7 major groups of Han languages which use Chinese characters, as well as ethnic minority languages like Mongolian, Tibetan, and Uyghur, which have their own writing systems.
Han languages like Mandarin, Shanghainese and Taishanese are still often referred to as dialects, even though they often sound completely different and are not mutually intelligible.
Take this sentence. My family doesn't really like to eat potatoes. In Mandarin, it's 我们家不太喜欢吃土豆.
In Taishanese, 我嘅家閒唔係幾鍾意吃時代.
And in Shanghainese, 阿拉屋里不是老歡喜吃洋鮮魚.
And misunderstandings were part of the reason people wanted a standardised language in China. In 1913, just 2 years after China became a republic, a conference was held to establish a national language. Delegates campaigned for Cantonese, Shanghainese, or even an invented hybrid, but ultimately the government decided on Mandarin because it had the widest reach.
Since then, government policies have pushed for it to be used across the board in education, media, and the public sphere. First, compulsory Mandarin classes were introduced into all schools.
Soon after, all classes were being taught in Mandarin. And now, kids are told to speak Mandarin even in the playground.
Outside of education, government policies have also pushed for Mandarin to be used in radio, TV, and in public-facing organisations. So other languages are increasingly relegated to the kitchen table or the fish market. Many welcome the switch to Mandarin. They see it as the language of opportunity, of social mobility and international exchange.
And the current government sees speaking a single language as key to national unity and strength. But while these policies restrict the use of all languages other than Mandarin, the impact is especially pronounced for ethnic minorities, whose right to use their own languages is supposed to be protected by Chinese law. But increasingly, minorities are forced to assimilate.
In 2010, as many as 1,000 Tibetan students protested over curbs on using their language in schools. And there were similar protests in 2020 in Inner Mongolia. In Xinjiang, human rights groups have described the suppression of Uyghur and other minority languages as a cultural genocide.
Music is one space where people are pushing back. Hip-hop has become a hotbed of language resistance, with artists rapping in everything from Uyghur to Sichuanese
and lots of other musicians still use their local language too. Recently, a movie shot almost entirely in Shanghainese, meaning the vast majority of the country needed subtitles to understand it, became a surprise box office smash.
侬放心。
更不管中国大陆的政策是啥，阿拉辣海国外的华人肯定还是会得坚持讲阿拉自家的母語的。
我用會考賽喺海上來有墨爾本上博產嘅經歷來有，我哋而家好有能力啦。
And Annie Louey joins me now. Annie, even one of China's most historically important languages is under threat.
Yes, that's right. You might be familiar with Manchu because of the Manchu Qing dynasty that reigned from 1644 to 1911. And it was such a hugely spoken language. It was the language of emperors. But in just a few years, it declined so severely that there's less than 100 speakers now.
And many more as well, potentially facing extinction?
Yes, and I used to think that I spoke critically endangered language, but it's not true. There's actually over 1 million people in Taishan who speak Taishanese and over 1.3 million diaspora around the world. So it's not up to me to carry the flame, thank goodness, because I'm not that fluent. But other languages, there are some that are on the brink. There's over 100 of them that are critically endangered. And it is about those resources that you saw, some of the things like rap songs, movies that help with carrying the languages forward into the future. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with those other languages. And that song, that rap actually really slaps. So I'm keen to learn that language now, Stan.
Absolutely. Annie, thank you.
Thanks.
And now for what's making news on the platforms people use, Weibo and WeChat. And Michael, while the lockdown in Shanghai continues, officials are on alert in the capital, Beijing.
Yes, a number of people in the city were diagnosed with COVID over the weekend, and now many are showing photos of empty supermarket shelves as panic buying sets in.
新冠肺炎病毒感染者初步流调结果显示，目前已隐匿传播了1周，感染者人群多样，活动范围广，目前已涉及学校、旅行团及多个家庭。随着排查力度的加大，未来还将发现续发病例。
And in Shanghai, people are voicing frustrations online.
Yes, one protest video titled Voices of April has been particularly popular. It features audio clips of citizens complaining about conditions under lockdown.
"我原来昨天就想送给你的，为什么呢？因为我怕这个大家相互感染。但是呢，今天我想了想，因为病毒呢都不会死人的，要饿死人的。"
Authorities moved swiftly to censor the video, taking it down and disabling searches for the film. But netizens keep finding new ways to post it, changing the title or even rotating it to get around restrictions.
Michael, thank you. And residents in parts of the city have been in lockdown now for 5 weeks as officials try to contain the outbreak and pursue a COVID-0 policy. China Tonight met Whitney Lofts, who has spent the time volunteering to deliver supplies to people in her compound.
Today, I wanted to take you guys on a volunteering run with me to deliver essentials to all the neighbours within my building.
I'm Whitney, and I've been living in Shanghai for 7 years now. And during the COVID-19 lockdown, I'm actually volunteering.
After I suit up head to toe in protective gear, I head to the front gate and load up a pushcart with whatever needs to be delivered.
So a compound is a series of apartment buildings that are in a gated community. So whether or not you are allowed out of your building eventually and when that will be is really dependent on the lockdown status of your compound.
For buildings like ours with positive COVID cases, residents are only allowed to leave their homes for daily testing, no exceptions. So volunteers like my girlfriend and I have become essential in ensuring that people still get access to everything they need, like food, water, and disinfectant.
So we do have a group chat within our building. The neighbourhood committee representative who's responsible for my building would initially just call out and say, "Hey, I need bodies to move things." And for me, I did really see this as something that I really wanted to do.
The delivery process is relatively straightforward. As I said, we have positive cases in our building, so we have to have full PPE on at all times when volunteering in order to protect ourselves and others. Only one person is allowed to deliver items for the whole building at any one time. So this process can really take anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours, depending on what and how frequent things are coming in.
One of the main ways that we've been getting necessities in is through group buying. Logistics are incredibly strained right now, so that has been the most effective way for us to get what we need. They do arrive quite regularly, and it is great things that we do need, like fresh vegetables, fruits, rice, noodles.
We all hang bags outside our apartment doors for small items like receiving new rat tests every day. And I love how my neighbour is making a statement right here with that LV swag bag. Kind of makes me feel like I've got to start dressing up too under this marshmallow suit.
I don't think that we're aware of what's coming next, because this lockdown was supposed to end on April 5th, and we're still here. We're all just trying to do what we can to, move our own small communities through each stage as safely as possible.
Thank you for your service. We really appreciate it.
I really hope we all gonna be free soon. Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Communist Party is involved in almost all aspects of Chinese life, controlling the government, the military, the police, the courts, and the classrooms. It might look like the party chooses its leadership from the bottom up. In fact, it's the other way around. Votes for upper committee members are often little more than a rubber stamp on choices made from above.
And that's all for this week. Next week on the show, China's attempts to become a football superpower. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great night.